The assassination of John F. Kennedy stands as a singular, jagged scar across the psyche of the 20th century, a moment scrutinized with such relentless intensity that one might assume every physical artifact associated with that day in Dallas had been catalogued, preserved, and tucked away behind museum glass. Yet, in the deep, silent trenches of the Atlantic Ocean, nearly 2 miles beneath the surface, lies a 400-pound bronze Handley Britannia casket that serves as one of the most haunting and least discussed witnesses to the tragedy. This was the original vessel, hastily selected from O'Neill's funeral home in the frantic, blood-slicked hour following the shots at Dealey Plaza. While the world reeled from the news of the president's death, a logistical and bureaucratic storm was brewing within the halls of Parkland Hospital. The Secret Service, driven by a desperate urgency to secure the president's body and return to the safety of Washington, bypassed Texas' law regarding autopsies, essentially forcing this massive, ornate bronze coffin through the narrow doors of Air Force One. The coffin itself was a masterpiece of funerary art, cast from solid bronze with a white satin lining, but it was fundamentally ill-suited for the violent transit it was about to endure. During the flight back to Andrews Air Force Base, the sheer weight of the casket made it difficult to maneuver in the cramped quarters of the presidential plane. Reports later indicated that the structure was damaged, the handles were strained, the lid was warped, and the interior had become a grim, visceral record of the day's trauma, with blood seeping into the very fabric of the lining. By the time the body was transferred to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy that would fuel decades of controversy, the Dallas coffin had become a logistical liability and a psychological burden that the burgeoning Kennedy legacy was not prepared to carry. To truly grasp the absurdity of this object's journey, we have to go back to the O'Neill funeral home, where Vernon O'Neill received the most high-stakes phone call of his career just minutes after the president was pronounced dead. The request was simple but impossible: provide the finest casket available, and do it now. The Britannia model was chosen specifically because it was a Rolls-Royce of burial vessels, a double-walled bronze behemoth that felt appropriately regal for a fallen world leader. However, the sheer physical reality of the bronze box immediately collided with the frantic nature of the day. When the Secret Service attempted to move the casket out of Parkland Hospital, they were met by Dr. Earl Rose, the Dallas County medical examiner, who stood his ground, insisting that the law required an autopsy on Texas soil before the body could leave. The ensuing battle of the hallway saw the heavy bronze casket utilized almost as a battering ram. Secret Service agents, some with guns drawn, literally shoved the 400-pound box through a set of double doors and squeezed it into a hearse, damaging the ornate handles and the soft metal of the lid in the process. This physical trauma to the casket was a prelude to the bureaucratic trauma that would follow. On board Air Force One, 4 rows of seats had to be ripped out of the aft compartment to make room for the bronze passenger. Throughout the somber flight, Jacqueline Kennedy refused to leave its side, her pink Chanel suit stained with the very same fluid that was now saturating the white satin interior of the O'Neill Britannia. Once the body arrived at Bethesda for the autopsy, the Dallas coffin became a central piece of a mystery that conspiracy theorists have chewed on for over 60 years. According to some reports, including those in David Lifton's provocative work Best Evidence, the handling of the president's body between the time it left Dallas in the bronze casket and the time it arrived at the autopsy table in Bethesda is a missing link in the chain of evidence. Some technicians and witnesses at Bethesda claim the president's body arrived in a plain gray shipping casket or body bag, rather than the ornate bronze vessel the public saw being loaded in Dallas. While these claims remain the subject of intense debate and are often dismissed by official historians as a result of chaotic misidentification, they highlight why the bronze casket itself was so controversial. It wasn't just a box, it was a primary witness to the chain of custody. If the casket was damaged, opened, or altered during that flight, the bronze shell was the only thing that would know the truth. This may explain why, once the autopsy was complete and a new mahogany casket was selected for the funeral, the federal government suddenly viewed the bronze Britannia not as a relic, but as a radioactive problem that needed to be neutralized. The mahogany casket was the one the world saw during the funeral procession, the one that sat on the catafalque in the Capitol Rotunda, and the one that was eventually lowered into the ground at Arlington. The original bronze coffin, meanwhile, was relegated to a nondescript storage room at the National Archives, specifically in Building 160 at the Washington Navy Yard. It sat there for over 2 years, a 400-pound secret that no one wanted to touch. Internal memos from 1965 and 1966 show a government increasingly desperate to close the loop. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother and then Attorney General, was particularly adamant that the casket should not become a ghoulish museum piece. The fear was that a private collector or morbid entrepreneur might somehow obtain the vessel and put it on display. In the bureaucratic mind, there was no middle ground, no respectful archive or secure vault. The only solution to prevent the public interest from being harmed was the total, irreversible destruction of the object. They didn't want to melt it down, as the metal would still be the metal that held the president. They didn't want to bury it on land, where it could be exhumed. They wanted it gone from the face of the earth. The final mission for the Dallas Coffin, known to only a handful of officials, took place in the pre-dawn hours of February 1966. AC-130 Hercules transport plane was prepared at Andrews Air Force Base. To ensure the casket would stay at the bottom of the sea, it was not merely tossed into the waves. It was prepared with the ritualistic precision of a burial at sea. The bronze box was weighted with multiple 80-pound sandbags and placed inside a specially constructed wooden crate. To prevent any air pockets from keeping the vessel afloat, numerous holes were drilled into both the crate and the bronze shell of the casket itself. The plane took off and headed 100 miles east of the Maryland-Delaware coast, reaching a point over the Atlantic where the continental shelf drops off into the deep abyss. This specific location, where the water reaches a depth of approximately 9,000 feet, was chosen specifically because it was beyond the reach of any salvage technology available in the mid-1960s. When the cargo ramp lowered and the crate slid into the dark water, it didn't just sink, it vanished into a trench that is effectively a pressurized, lightless tomb. The crew circled the spot, watching the bubbles dissipate, ensuring that the morbid attraction was now a permanent resident of the ocean floor. The decision to drown the Dallas Coffin remains one of the most glaring inconsistencies in the history of presidential preservation. To this day, the Smithsonian and the National Archives hold on to artifacts that are far more morbid or traumatic. We have the shirt Abraham Lincoln wore when he was shot, stained with his blood. We have a limousine in which Ronald Reagan was nearly killed, complete with the bullet-resistant glass that took a hit. We have the very rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald used. These are objects that were deemed essential for the historical record, for researchers to study and for the public to confront. Why was a bronze casket treated differently? Why did the government decide that the specific physical witness was contrary to the public interest to keep? By dropping it into a 9,000-foot trench, they didn't just protect the Kennedy family from ghouls. They effectively sanitized the most chaotic and debated hours of the assassination. They removed the container that held the president during the most critical period of medical and forensic transition. It is a decision that, while perhaps born out of a genuine desire for privacy and dignity, inadvertently created a permanent hole in the physical evidence of 1963.